How should we honor the critter companions that we have loved so much? That's the question we're going to ask and explore today on Poetry, Passion, and Pleasure podcast with your host, Dale Byron. This is exactly the kind of question we like to delve into, where we use poetry in very often non-traditional ways to help us in our everyday lives. The note that I made for myself is that if you have ever shared a home, a life, an often all too brief period of time with a critter that you've loved, cared for, and that in turn has cared for you, well, I think this episode is especially for you. What words might we choose to honor the critters that have given us so much happiness, so much joy, and of course, grief at their passing? The cat, the dog, the horse, the goat, the cow, or any creature of your choice that have become, in many ways, kindred spirits for a lot of us. And for those of us lucky enough to walk along this path of living with such creatures, with such special critters. So, anyway, let's dig right in and we'll talk a little bit more. I got a few stories, of course, for you, as I always do. This first poem is actually about a cat, and a very special cat that I was fortunate, my wife and I were fortunate to spend many, many years, 23-ish years with. And her name was Paloma. That's the title of this poem. It's called Paloma. Our cat, that sleek and sinuous caramel colored muscle, our cat, that sleek and sinuous caramel colored muscle, pours herself effortlessly through the kitchen, over the hardwood of the entryway, into the bath, not to take one, but to ledge walk close by the bubbles she loves. Close by, the excited danger of wet fur. The excited danger of wet fur. Well, as we're going to talk about in just a minute, one of the things that has us turn to poetry, I believe, is the experience of happiness, of joy, of celebration. And of course, the other very predictable thing that turns us to poetry, or many of us, is loss and grieving. Now, this is a poem, of course, it's about joy and about something that we noticed with our cat, Paloma, who was an amazing, amazing creature. And I know those of you listening, as we talk about these poems and as I speak these poems, you're going to be saying to yourself, yes, that critter, that creature that I spent so much time with, so much of my life, but not enough often, or almost always not enough. I guess I would say it that way. You're going to say how special that critter was as well. But yes, Paloma would love to walk on the edge of the bathtub. And yet, it was like she loved it. And yet there was this excited danger of a cat falling into the tub. That never happened. That would have been traumatic. Not to take a bath, but to ledge walk close by the bubbles she loves, close by the excited danger of wet fur. I love that. So let's keep cooking. Now, as I was going to say, there are two things, again, that reliably send many of us toward poetry. And one is joy and celebration. The other is loss and grieving. So let's step into the other side of this honoring of our critters with a poem by Bruce Weigel, and it's called May, a Dog of Excellence. And Anyway, well, I'll say more about Bruce Weigel in just a moment. Let's just say the poem. Speak it. I wanted to stay with my dog. I wanted to stay with my dog when they did her in. I wanted to stay with my dog when they did her in. We see often, by the way, let me just step out of the poem for a second, that a good poem drops us right in the middle of the action, tells us so much about where the poem is going, just like a good story where we're dropped in the middle. We don't know any details, but we certainly get the context. And in this case, we get it in a big and intense way. Again, the first two lines: I wanted to stay with my dog when they did her in. I told the young veterinarian, who wasn't surprised, shivering on the chrome table. She did not raise her eyes to me when I came in. So you see this scene. The young veterinarian was not surprised that the owner of May, a dog of excellence, wanted to be with her during this time. I wanted to stay with my dog when they did her in. I told the young veterinarian, who wasn't surprised. Shivering on the chrome table, she did not raise her eyes to me when I came in. Something was resolved in her, some darkness exchanged for the pain. There were a few more words about the size of her tumor and her age, and how we wanted to stop her suffering, or our own, or stop all suffering from happening before us. And then the nurse shaved May's skinny leg with those black clippers. She passed the needle to the doctor, and for once I knew what to do. And for once I knew what to do, and held her head against mine. I cleaved to that smell and lied into her ear that it would be all right, that it would be all right. The veterinarian whom I'd fought about when to do this thing said through tears that it would take only a few minutes, as if that were not a long time. But there was no cry or growl. Only the weight of her in my arms, and then on the world. I cleaved to that smell and lied into her ear that it would be all right. The veterinarian whom I'd fought about when to do this thing, said through tears that it would take only a few minutes, as if that were not a long time. But there was no cry or growl, only the weight of her in my arms, and then on the world. This poem actually appeared in the book I wrote on poetry for the leader inside you. So I had a little interaction with Bruce Weigel, and he's a delightful human being, delightful man and poet, and was so gracious with allowing me to use his poem. And yeah, just an amazing person. And that poem, May, a Dog of Excellence, has been in my list of favorite poems for a long, long time. Okay, so I promise in just a moment we're going to go back to the joy side of honoring the critters we've loved in our lives. But I have to bring a poem also, which is pretty intense. But again, if you notice that oftentimes poems have a certain intensity, but when we are dealing with grieving and loss, as we do with a critter that we've spent a lot of time in our lives with, who we've shared our lives with, and who are now, and the critter has now passed, then we have a way of wanting to honor that relationship. So this is this is what's called a found poem. All I did when I found this poem, it was on one of these online neighborhood things that you see, and I just simply added the line breaks. I didn't change a word. So this is what's called a found poem, and I just called it Our Beautiful Red Border Collie. That's the title that I lifted. Our Beautiful Red Border Collie. And the found poem goes like this. Yesterday, our beautiful red border collie, Rusty, was run over and killed by a speeding driver on Midvale between Shoreline and Shasta. He was off leash, but on the side of the road next to his mom, who was almost hit along with our other dog. I'm very hurt and angry about this. This could have been you or your child. More details soon. I have to go tell my son that Rusty is dead. It's a found poem. That's a found poem. Yesterday, our beautiful red border collie, Rusty, was run over and killed by a speeding driver on Midvale between Shoreline and Shasta. He was off leash, but on the side of the road next to his mom, who was almost hit along with our other dog. I'm very hurt. I am very hurt and angry about this. This could have been you or your child. More details soon. I have to go tell my son that Rusty is dead. You know, the great poet Rilke said sometimes the only thing we have is our great grief cry in life. Just a cry of grief. Ah. When I first saw this, you know, it's been some years ago when I found this poem. It just occurred to me that this person that wrote the poem was just doing a grief cry, and that the grief was even more palpable than the anger. And there was a fair amount of anger in these lines as well. Okay, so let's keep cooking. I promised a different tone and a different kind of poem. And this is a kind of a mysterious poem by William Stafford, but I love it. Quirky little poem. But it's also, it's a lot about the joyfulness. William Stafford was a big sucker for dogs. I know that. So this poem is called Choosing a Dog by William Stafford. Here's how the poem goes. It's love, they say. It's love, they say. You touch the right one, and a whole half of the universe wakes up. A new half. Some people never find that half, or they neglect it or trade it for money or success, and it dies. Now, let's just stop for a minute there. Well, even though this is a little lighter poem, there are some very serious moments. It's a celebration poem, but there's also some serious life lessons in here. I love it. And again, remember, with a great story, a great poem, often you just are, we're dumped right in the middle of the action. And we have to go, oh, wait, what's going on? Well, there's a reason for that. It is exciting to us. We become curious. So this choosing a dog, let's do those first couple of stanzas. It's a very short poem. Let's do those again. It's love, they say. You touch the right one, and a whole half of the universe wakes up. A new half, a new half. Some people never find that half, or if they neglect it or trade it for money or success, and it dies. The faces of big dogs tell. The faces of big dogs tell over the years that size is a burden. You enjoy it for a while, but then maintenance gets to you. When I get old, I think I'll keep. When I get old, I think I'll keep not a little dog, but a serious dog for the casual drop-in criminal. My kind of dog, unimpressed by dress or manner, just knowing what's really there by the smell, just knowing what's really there by the smell. Well, your good dogs, some things they hear, they don't really want you to know. It's too grim or ethereal. And sometimes when they look in the fire, they see time going on and someone alone, and they don't say anything. This whole poem is so juicy to me, but this back half of it, my kind of dog, unimpressed by dress or manner, just knowing what's really there by smell. I heard William Stafford say once in a talk, he said, the average hound dog has got a whole university in that nose. I love that. My kind of dog, unimpressed by dress or manner, just knowing what's really there by the smell. Your good dogs, some things they hear, they don't really want you to know. It's too grim or ethereal. And sometimes when they look in the fire, they see time going on and someone alone, but they don't say anything. You see how humor and pathos can live in the same beautiful poem story. William Stafford here in this delicious poem called Choosing a Dog. I've loved that poem for a long, long time. And again, notice how, poems are these stories without the boring parts. We've said that a lot on this podcast. I think that's a good example. Okay, we're going to end with this one last poem. And again, remember our theme. We're talking about critters we've loved, critters that we've spent huge parts of our life with. Paloma, our beloved cat, and our other beloved cat, Apollo. But that poem was about Paloma, and each of them lived for a very long time. A very long time. We were, and I do consider her a kindred spirit. She was an amazing little bodhisattva who taught all sorts of lessons. And I'm sure as you're thinking about your own special critters, your own special creatures that you've spent time with during your life, you are thinking the same thing about how amazing and wonderful they are and were for those that are no longer with you or with us. Okay, this poem is called Landscape with Dog. Landscape with Dog by Paul Mariana. Landscape with Dog. Goes like this. Often up the back steps he came, bearing gifts, frozen squirrels, sodden links of sausage, garter snakes, the odd sneaker. The gnarled marks are still there as witness that confined, he took his tensions out on doors and tables. And life went on, and life went on, and mornings, peace and war, good times and depressions, pale sticks turned to trees, boys to larger boys, then men. Ice storms, wakes, elections came and went, and always he was there like air, a good wife. But then there's this, to think about and think about again. The last time I saw Sparky, he was dying. His legs trembled and he kept moping after me. I remember trying to get my stubborn mower started with no time then to stop and pet a dog. And having no time left myself, and having no left time left himself, Sparky thanked me in the only way he could for 11 years of care, then got up and walked out of my life and lay down somewhere in the woods to die. One of the best things life ever handed me. While I went on looking for a 1-inch nut and bolt in among my rusting odds and ends. The last stanza again. The last time I saw Sparky, he was dying. His legs trembled, and he kept moping after me. I remember trying to get my stubborn mower started with no time then to stop and pet a dog. And having no time left himself, Sparky thanked me in the only way he could for 11 years of care, then got up and walked out of my life and lay down somewhere in the woods to die. One of the best things life ever handed me while I went on looking for a 1-inch nut and bolt in among my rusting odds and ends. Some years ago, I was speaking that poem in a university class that was an Osher lifelong learning class, and there was a woman there who I could see in the back of the room. I could see the tears starting to form in her eyes. And I said something about the sentimentality of poems like this that don't work. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, give you my theory about it. But I think she thought at first that I was somehow thinking that she was being sentimental or something, and that and she became embarrassed that she was taken by tears and emotion. And of course, as soon as I figured that out, I quickly disabused her of that. And I told her, I totally got the tears. I totally got it. And I said that it's actually, my point was that if we think about the word sentimental means to leave important things out. That's why often greeting card poems that try to make sentimental make sentimental our relationships with, our parents or loved ones or whatever, and they only speak about the delightfulness. There's no difficulty or complexity to relationships. A good poem talks about the complexity of relationships, which does not mean that we don't love the person or the creature in this case. so much, incredibly much. It's just that there's that at times, if you're going to write a poem that's not sentimental, you've got to kind of give the whole context. And I love the way this poem does that. And I love the way there was, in addition to the grief and loss, that the protagonist in this poem, who's speaking about his dog, Sparky, is saying what an incredible, hurtful on one level, but hurtful, obviously, that the animal died, but hurtful that he didn't stop. And what a huge life lesson you get that comes through this poem that Sparky taught, even as the dog was there in and dying, the last day, the last hours of the dog's life. So I would say also that when a poem is too overt and comes at us too hard, it can kind of, it's the hurt can be so much it just closes our heart down. But when a poem uses some details and kind of comes, as Emily Dickinson used to say, in a kind of slant way, then in some ways our heart is more open. It's allowed to stay more open because we're not overwhelmed by the poem, but because, ironically, paradoxically, because our heart is able to stay more open, it actually breaks more fully. And when our heart breaks cleanly and more fully, we're actually able to begin the healing process. That's been my experience with myself and watching others. The last time I saw Sparky, he was dying. His legs trembled and he kept moping after me. I remember trying to get my stubborn mower started, with no time then to stop and pet a dog. And having no time left himself, Sparky thanked me in the only way he could for 11 years of care, and lay down somewhere in the woods to die. One of the best things life ever handed me, while I went on looking for a 1-inch nut and bolt in among my rusting odds and ends. So not only can we share in the loss that's talked about in this poem, we can also let our hearts be wide open and break, as I'm sure any of us who've lost a beloved pet, lost a beloved creature, a critter that was such a companion, it broke our hearts. And yet at some point, the wonderfulness of that relationship, I think, as our hearts begin to heal, we remember back, as I now do, with the incredible wonderfulness, how sacred and grateful I am to have had the critters in my life, like Paloma. How grateful I am, and all the other critters that I've had in my life as well. So, okay, that is a wrap. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. And again, that is a wrap. As I always like to say, if there's someone that you think might enjoy this approach to poetry, which I think is a little different, and if you have someone like that, send it along to them, refer it to them. That would be great. I'm just trying to get the word out. And as I also like to say, until next time and next poem or poems, please take good care of yourself, and if possible, take good care of someone else too.